European-friendly edition of the Tools and CI meeting. And we probably should do this once a month. We'll have to see if there's a desire out of this group to do it more often. I have no problem with this time. As usual, our agenda is pretty light, but we have been talking through the discussion forum as well as the mailing list about trying to enable CI for EDK2 platforms. So I think that is the main topic for today. But before we get started, is there anybody else that has a topic they want to bring up?
We actually have plenty, but I'm not sure how well this will go without Pedro. So there were plenty of issues with X4 package in general, not CI specific, like its obvious placement in EDK2 platforms, while OVMF is still in the EDK2 repository. So OVMF obviously cannot depend on X4 package. Then there was a problem of X4 package relying on an UTF-8 library, which currently for some reason is a Redfish package. And we were wondering whether it would be sensible to move it to MDE module package or MDE package. And also we wanted to inquire about GitHub pull requests status quo and the status quo of the compiler intrinsics library.
All right. I mean, I think all of those except for maybe the compiler intrinsic library are kind of under the same umbrella of the CI system and the fallout of that CI for EDK2 platforms. Some of that, gets into the discussion around dependencies, as well as, platforms in certain locations. Is there any, I know since Mike Kinney's here, and I think he's been involved in the compiler intrinsic discussion, is that something that we could bring up now?
Yeah, I think we could. I can quickly answer actually that Unicode library. I had discussed in the past with Pedro when he worked on the ext4 package about that one, and the idea of moving it to the MDE package. I think that's a really good idea. I think somebody just needs to go create the patch set to move it there to the more common location. That makes a lot of sense. The intrinsic library is one that has been through fits and starts over the years. So I really don't know where it sits today because I don't see anybody leading the technical solution. The state of affairs right now is that we have every submodule in the EDK2 repo that has a dependency on some standard C library has implemented their own gasket to get that code to work. And I think that is at least 5 or maybe even 6 components now that have done that, their own custom gasket. So the idea of a common intrinsic library that also covers the standard C functions that can be used by all 6 of those, I think is a great idea to consolidate that duplicate wrapper code that exists across those different implementations. As I said, we just don't have anybody that's leading the work there.
Okay, thank you for the update.
All right. Any other topics for today besides CI? Isaac, since we talked last week, has there been any update from you?
Not much. I mean, fix some things with readmes, compiling, things like that, but not beyond that.
All right. Marvin, how do you want to proceed without Pedro?
I'm not sure. I'm still trying to keeping it up to date via text messages about what we're talking, but he's still not responding. I think I can kind of comment on most of those things, but I'm only a reviewer for X4 package, so I'm not a maintainer. I'm not in a role to make any definite calls. Except for the mentioned topics, we still have kind of the open discussion about the multi-repository design, which kind of came to a stall on the GitHub discussion.
Mike Kenny, I mean, as one of the stewards, I haven't seen you weigh in yet on the discussion thread. I think honestly we need more people from the community throwing in their opinions and helping to guide where this goes. Is there more people that are looking at that and willing to provide their insight?
I've reached out to our to the platform owners that I have contacts with, and I think Isaac, you weighed in on that one, right?
Yep.
On that discussion.
Yeah.
So I don't know what additional. I guess I have not looked at the discussion in the last week, Sean. What's the latest status of the discussion of what the leading proposal is right now?
I think our current status is we've had a fair amount of back and forth around using the PyTools, which is how EDK2's CI system is built. And I'm not confident that there's been anything constructive said or anything that we can that's actionable. Although I think Rebecca has had some comments around other operating systems and their support. As far as the repo layout, I know there's a lot of varying opinions, and there are pros and cons of all these different designs. I don't think we've yet seen it take shape. And Marvin, I'm happy to hear any feedback otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much you followed the discussion of that with Nate, but my biggest problem was we don't really care as much for the layout, which was Nate was focusing on, like how should be the folder structures and the repository structures. That's not so much our concern. The main concern really has been, and that's been the most important part of this big comment I wrote, how those repositories handle their interdependencies, especially related to versioning. So I'm much more concerned with how versioning is done. And if you're saying like EDK platforms gets like a stable tag, that would be a good step forward, but this would not resolve all issues related to, for example, bisectability during development. So this is kind of my biggest pressure point, to have a sane interdependency versioning model between the repositories, rather than discussing the details about which goes into which repository and what the folder layout is.
Yeah, I think that really clarifies, I think, the primary work item here, which is how do you manage those versioning and interdependencies with multiple repositories. Does anybody have any examples of successful existing examples that work with this?
So, I mean, I guess first question, I mean, EDK repo's out there, right, Mike? And that manages this problem. That's a solution for it. And then submoduling things is kind of a solution, right? Is there something else you're thinking of?
I guess Google has had something in which EDK repo was loosely based upon, right? Or so as far as for the feature set. Doesn't Google have something? Or maybe it was their firmware project had something. I forget which one.
I think they have a tool called the repo tool they use for Android,
Okay.
which I believe your EDK2 repo tool is built with a similar idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it started there and ended up a pretty unique implementation, I think. It's fair to say. But it seems to be highly functional, and I mean, we use it internally. And it is a way to do it where you get features like bisect, and you get complicated things like branch and branch copies of commits and things. So it's pretty capable and it's pretty mature, as I understand it.
If I may interject again, the problem is not so much the technical implementation, like whether we choose submodules or whatever. The main problem is how does EDK2 platforms or any n numbers of other repositories that may be split from it update their dependency on EDK2. So I'm not sure if anyone really read the discussion thread we had on it, but I try to outline kind of a dependency chain of the packages. So if we have like a product and we say the top level package is a board package, there have been a couple of boards in EDK2 platforms. It could be more complicated than this, like there'd be another package up there, like a product package, but in a simple model, it would probably be on top of a board package. Then you have the silicon package, then you have a platform package, and then you still have feature packages, and then you have EDK2 at the very bottom. And my main concern is, how does this chain update? Because it's not really possible we kind of mix and match those versions. So if you have a silicon package that depends on the EDK2 stable tag, whatever, X, and then we have a package, platform package that depends on EDK2 stable tag, Y, any other EDK2 revision really, and how this is managed when those repositories are not really explicitly synced to update EDK2 at a fixed rate that's, well, that kind of that leads to predictable results in this sense. That's more of a problem. And what I have listed there were 3 models I've thought of, and they might have proper names. I didn't know them by any name, and so I gave them artificial names, which were like strictly coupling. So if we take just the 2 examples, EDK2 and EDK2 platforms, if a patch is submitted to EDK2, is it expected that a patch series that updates EDK2 platforms immediately to the next commit in the main branch? If this was the case, this would be what I call strict coupling. So we basically treat it as a monorepository. So any patches must cover all repositories that are in this group, like EDK2 and EDK2 platforms. And basically their main branch tips are always in sync. Then I had a model called loosely coupling, where basically EDK2 platforms would decide on its own, which kind of is tough because there's many packages with many package maintainers. But somehow it would decide on its own when to update its reference to EDK2. And if we had multiple split repositories, say we split Intel Silicon repositories, and we split Intel Platform repositories, and then you split the board repositories, you would kind of need to find the greatest common denominator EDK2 you can support from all those packages when you're building a top-level package, which is a bit inconvenient, but maybe it would work. What Sean mentioned at some point was a normal package system, like done for like high-level programming languages, where you treat it as isolated components that can depend on each other. This is what I call cascading in the comment. And this would be if the dependent repositories do not sync to the dependencies unless there's a stable tag. So if we have EDK2 and EDK2 platforms would only sync to EDK2 once there's been a stable tag. And this has its whole own set of problems where they have to be perfectly synced so patches get in there in time. So we have a security patch in EDK2, and we have some sort of bad synchronization of those repository layers with regards to the stable tags. The time it takes for the patch to land in EDK2, then land in the stable tag, and then land in a higher level repository stable tag, and then land in another higher level repository stable tag, it might take a very, very long time till it actually reaches production for those boards. So I was left pretty inconclusive how this problem should be tackled.
Adding to that, I think I echo that the challenge here is not technical. The challenge here is getting the groups together and getting an alignment and getting enough people in the room that actually care and will actually pull together and organize releases and do that. I've advocated for breaking up the repos significantly because I think that ultimately that means that you have less people to get in the same room and get alignment with. And so instead of trying to drive a very diverse EDK2 platforms that has a lot of ARM content, a lot of Intel content, and everyone's on a different schedule, you can drive that with a much smaller group and make more sense of the repos and their release schedules. So that's been the main reason I've been trying to drive for splitting repos. I don't think large repos and mono repos, especially with the lackluster involvement we have and kind of, you know, the weakness in driving this organization consistently, will be successful either. I think it maybe helps you a little bit, but it doesn't lead to success. So I think, again, I echo that it is non-technical. We're not looking for, do we use submodules? We're looking for who's going to help drive alignment in these repos.
Agreed. Yes, thanks.
I would interject that the technical solution can potentially support the continuation of the multiple platforms within a single repo versus having to break it out, right? There's not just the getting the right people together to help make decisions for that group of platforms or subset of platforms or not, but like what Isaac mentioned, the idea of a manifest driven kind of solution where each platform defines its dependencies. You can live in a mono repo as long as the manifest is always correct and updated for that platform, as far as which version of EDK2 platforms and which version of EDK2 are a match set for that specific platform. So in that sense, that you can make it more flexible with tools, right? As far as how many repos you break it up into or how many things you merge together into a repo.
Agree, but I think number one, your manifest now becomes its own thing, and that you just did what I asked, which is really like lower the number of dependencies to control a release, and a manifest is now owned by, you know, if it's Intel releasing an open board package and a, you know, some new generation, they own that and they don't have to coordinate with everyone else around their versions. So you're right in that you've achieved kind of the same goal I had by breaking the repos. I do worry though, most of the time there is some common assets across the board, and that's when things start to fall apart. And so I think the larger repos don't help illuminate that problem and don't help avoid that problem.
Yeah, except that the individual platform teams that are on their manifest, if there's a feature they want from an update of a common component, they have to make the choice to move up. It's their responsibility, right?
Yeah, sure. I guess I would turn around and ask a couple of questions though. Like if we're gonna run EDK2 platforms as, like, you know, let's pretend that we know there's 200 DSCs in there. Let's pretend there's 50 platforms in there, 50 unique manifests with all different versions. Why are they in the same repo? What are they getting about what value are they getting from being in the same repo? We're obviously not going to apply the same development process to them. They're not on the same schedule. You know, let's say one of them wanted to move to pull requests, and they could do that if they were in their own repo, but now they have to get this larger buy-in, or they all have to go through the mailing list and get a different set of maintainers to approve. I guess I'm just not understanding the reason that we hang on to this if we truly are going to develop them as diverse packages into a repo.
Okay, no, that's a good point, and I would highlight that I think if there's a group that wanted to maintain their own platform, there's no requirement they have to add it to EDK2 platforms. They could do it in a different GitHub location and point to their dependencies in the EDK2, and if they use some of the common stuff from EDK2 platforms, great, and they can manage it there. There is no requirement that every platform be added to EDK2 platforms. So then the question becomes, why would a platform team choose to add it to EDK2 platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's because, you know, a lot of the features content in EDK2 platforms could be used by many people. A lot of a lot of the drivers, a lot of the common platform content, the min platform package, some of the things we're doing, we don't have any real intention to segregate them, and they could be useful to other silicon vendors and vice versa, right? And then there's things like QEMU, which spans silicon architectures. And so I think that's 2/3 of the content is potentially usable, which is why people are putting them in there. And I agree that the silicon stuff obviously isn't very useful for the others. I mean, except insofar as maybe sometimes there's benefits to have similar APIs so platforms can do things. I don't know. I speculate, right? We don't look too deeply into that, but I just think that's why. So historically, maybe there's not a strong reason to split the silicon stuff out separately just yet. But I don't think anybody would truly be heartbroken if they lost the ability to leverage ARM and Intel and AMD pieces or whatever.
Are there other package maintainers of EDK2 platforms here that have feedback, thoughts?
I mean, back to Marvin's three models. I can at least share that I think we've discussed the tightly coupled one before, mainly from a CI perspective, to understand if there's a change in the EDK2 that has an impact to EDK2 platforms, or vice versa, a change in EDK2 platforms that then has some compatibility issue with EDK2. That cross check of the tightly coupled one is at least informative. If you don't necessarily make it as a strong requirement that nothing goes through unless both CIs pass, but it's at least informative of highlighting compatibility issues that might show up. So I think there's value in testing the tightly coupled scenario, but we have to figure out what a policy would be if there's an actual failure from the tightly coupled one. The loosely coupled one, or even I view the delay to the stable tag for sync as the same as loosely coupled. It's just a timeline of when you choose to sync them up. And I think that there's an element of that that's been at least discussed in the past, I think, amongst the stewards about this idea of adding stable tags to the EDK2 platforms, is that I believe somebody had the idea that the stable tag for EDK2 platforms would be delayed by some period of time after the EDK2 stable tag, so that all the EDK2 platforms content could stabilize on the sync to the latest stable tag from EDK2. I think there's concerns about that if there's a bug found on the EDK2 platform side that requires a change in the EDK2, it's too late. You're past the stable tag. So how to align the idea of a stable tag between the EDK2 and EDK2 platforms, it almost needs to be, completely synchronized so that they're done at the same time, so that all issues are resolved from both perspectives. And that would apply not just to the platforms and silicon coded platforms. There's also a lot of the generic content that is intended to be reused on platforms that need specific features, with the additional features that are in the EDK2 platforms. All that content is about getting it lined up. So I don't know if Marvin, if you have, thoughts on, how the tightly coupling can be used for validation or just cross checks versus what would be the timeline to synchronize a stable tag for EDK2 platforms with EDK2?
Yeah, I can't really comment on that because I'm not maintaining any platform on EDK2 platforms. And honestly, I still don't really understand the reasons why there was a split in the first place. Like, the current split feels pretty, well, to an extent pointless. I can see how you can leverage several advantages of a multi-repository design. I don't really see EDK2 platforms as is leveraging them. And to those issues you just stated, yes, those are great concerns. But also my concern is if we split those repositories further, this is something that Sean was suggesting. If we split them further, we will keep adding delays till changes reach the top levels. So now we had like one delay. if we delay EDK2 platform stable tags by say a week, but then if we have like 3 more repositories stacked on top up to like the board package, it will be delayed by up to 4 weeks and causing all the same issues on several layers. So this issue kind of just keeps amplifying as you keep breaking out repositories.
Yeah, I think the original idea of the split between EDK2 and EDK2 platforms was to get EDK2 so it was focused on the industry standard features that are common to all platforms without any silicon specific or platform specific code in there. The one exception being a couple QEMU virtual platforms, or the emulator package platform as a way to help do CI on the core content itself. So the idea that there's a stable core that follows the industry standards in one repo, and then all the silicon and platform code is something that would consume the core. I think that was the intent of the model. I'm not sure if we're necessarily following that completely, but I think that was the intent. Sean, do you agree? Because I think you were one of those that were helping drive the some of the removal of content from EDK2 to focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think again that is our goal, is to try to get EDK2 down to a common set that more and more people agree upon as the common solution. I think I've clearly stated I have an opinion that I'd love to see EDK2 not forked and modified by everyone in the industry. I'd rather, I think it would serve our industry better if we could be all closer to what is published out there, and bug fixes and things were pushed more quickly and adopted more quickly. So that's kind of been the approach and position I've had. Yeah.
So I'm sorry for joining late, but I noticed that it's about at the halftime mark. Is there a way that maybe we could quickly summarize, like in a minute or less, what was discussed and decided in the first half of the meeting?
Michael, I think like any good meeting, we haven't decided anything. I think we've recapped some of the discussion. We've started talking about the different models for repos and management of those releases. We've talked about the values and the challenges of splitting the repo up. And I think we're still kind of mostly aligning on that a lot of our problems here aren't technical, and that we need to drive a little bit more industry alignment or group alignment here.
Okay. I think I have an understanding then of what's been discussed. Thank you.
Yeah, so Sean and Mike, from my perspective, EDK2 repo as a common repository that people stay up to date on the tip and is changed in a backwards compatible manner as much as possible is still a good right model. So I still like that. I wouldn't propose any changes to that. I would be happy if things that are not industry standard in general moved out, or things that are more optional moved out. Like certainly the Intel FSP packages don't feel like they're really industry standards. I mean, they may be widely useful, but they seem more like something that should land in the EDK2 platforms than the EDK2 everybody uses category. Are you still aligned with that model of EDK2 development, up to date, backwards compatible, industry standards oriented?
For sure. I would love to see more things move out. I think I can point to our reference, which is the Project Mu and the base core, right? We've definitely stripped that down to like, I think 6 packages, maybe 7 packages. And so I think there is an opportunity to move a lot more things out. That
internally, we do that with the repo tool. We use a sparse checkout to hide the packages we don't care about.
Yeah, I think that's a neat feature. Actually, it's funny because I think we briefly talked in the discussion around how more tools just creates more confusion and challenge, and I think that's totally true. And that has kind of been my argument against sparse checkout, is that it creates more dependency on tooling to get the repo right. But I hear you, and I think that's an interesting feature of that tool.
If I may interject right here, I was actually asking in the discussion thread about solutions like sparse checkout for concerns like storage space that have been brought up as advantages of the multi-repository design. Because if we're talking about isolating non-industry standards from industry standards, this is a logical separation. There's no intrinsic value in shoving those things in different repositories so long as they're logically separated. So even, I'm not proposing this, but even if it was as basic as we have an industry standard folder and a non-industry standard folder in the same repository, the goal would still be achieved. So I would like to understand why out of all solutions, the multi-repository solution is the one to go with. Because yes, we kind of avoid the extra tooling with like sparse checkout and whatever, but then we create a whole new problem with the versioning thing to which nobody seems to have a good answer to.
Yeah, so I can answer that from my perspective, and that's when I look across the ecosystem at the companies I work with, there are not one answers for how to manage these versioning. And aligning the many, many players in the ecosystem on one answer seems impossible to me. So there are people that want to point at 3 different locations for the EDK2 repo, and there are people that want to point at one and point at different tags for version management, and there are people that want to do forks, and so there's a huge diversity of solutions there that I don't know how to get aligned, even if we tried to do something by fiat for all of our customers or something like that.
Yeah, I would echo that same statement. Except for I think that there is more natural alignment if you have less packages and you have a clear, this repository houses this content and this is how we release and this is our development process and this is our review process. That is so much more nimble and easy when you have alignment of that community. And I think the bigger your repo becomes, the less alignment or the more effort you need to put in to drive that alignment. And I feel like this community is challenged right now in getting alignment there.
Honestly, I would also almost believe it's the opposite. Yeah, I understand the point that the bigger the repository grows, alignment gets more tough. However, what I would think would happen if you keep splitting EDK2 into more sub-packages, that eventually there maybe would be a subset of packages that actually thrive through this because they're kind of pushed away the burden of having to sync with the rest. But I also think that a couple of packages or repositories in this model would just more or less get semi-orphaned in an open development sense. I mean, there's already plenty of packages for which the patch review process is kind of sort of broken, where you submit a patch and you don't get a response, and you follow up and you don't get a response, and you follow up again and you don't get a response. And in the past, we had our dear ex-Stuart Laszlo to kind of ping and say, okay, can you please ask the maintainers to review our patch, which usually worked. This is a luxury we don't have anymore. And we actually have the concern that if the repositories are split further, which would also split like the management of the repositories. As you say, they can decide their own schedules, they can design their own release models, which means you have you actually have more parties that are doing management tasks. I'm not sure whether there's enough community staff ready to do this coordination.
So to me, that's enlightening. That brings out the packages that are poorly maintained or don't have maintainership, rather than letting them hide. And so that's actually why I like it. I think then as a community, we can decide whether that package is really important to our ecosystem and how do we want to support it. And if someone doesn't step forward, then clearly it's not important. So in a lot of ways, you're totally bringing out the reason why I want to see this, is because I think it will help lower the burden on those that have strong support and illuminate the ones that don't, and then we can decide what to do.
Interesting. I would like to agree. A problem is one of those packages I mentioned that caused trouble for us was MDE package. And I would say that's probably quite important to the community.
Well, I think what the general theme that people are talking about splitting stuff off is to achieve cohesion between the content that's in the repo. And so one of the problems I see is that if you don't have cohesion, it's hard to get agreement on things because people have different objectives. They have different development models that they may even be working on. Like not every package in EDK2 necessarily cares to follow the same versioning scheme or cadence. They might need different levels of CI support, right? So they might have different levels of importance. Reviewer time might differ depending on the package and how important it is, depending on the number of consumers that that package has. And so I think one of the things that I think Sean's mentioning that you help achieve is you get cohesion between the content. And whenever you get cohesion between the content, that means you can get better policy alignment against that content. I mean, in the real world, splitting repos is an inevitable fact of firmware development, right? Like it doesn't matter how much you consolidate in Tiano Core. For a real firmware to ever get built, it's going to need to depend on one or more repos. It's never going to be one repo. There's always going to be a dependency on EDK2. There may be a dependency on another repo. There's going to be dependencies on lots of different firmwares that are consolidated into the final firmware image, whether that is option ROMs or whatever other source is being built in the binaries and put into that image. So I wouldn't necessarily say that by focusing on EDK2 being one repo, you're alleviating the industry from having to deal with a multi-repo design. I think that's going to be inevitable in any case. But I do think that achieving cohesion between content in a repo can help provide better policies around that content, which kind of helps solve a lot of other problems.
I mean, I think that does highlight, I think, the potential tension that we have to work through, which is, the purpose of Tiano Core in general is about, enabling this firmware for, what are literally thousands of product designs in the world that have firmware in them, right? And they use different pieces of it in different ways with lots of dependencies well outside the Tiano Core area to build those product firmware images. So when it comes to those platforms that we're maintaining inside of Tiano Core, that is not about necessarily building products directly from the Tiano Core repo. It's about providing the right collateral from Tiano Core as a whole to support that entire ecosystem that needs to be able to build firmware for real products. And then so we have to figure out in Tiano Core, what is our goal of the platforms that are maintained inside of something like EDK2 platforms or the set of real hardware platforms that we do maintain somewhere in Tiano Core? What are we trying to accomplish with that? And what does that have? How does that help or not help our industry enablement for the rest of the real product designs out there? I mean, I think the value that those platforms bring is really helping prove that the core content inside of the EDK2 repo continues to have high quality that can be depended upon for all of those downstream consumers. So it's really more of a test check, but also it can also be an education or examples for porting and things like that as part of that, getting those real product designs done. So I think trying to figure out what we want to do as a community for support of Tiano Core for EDK2 content and EDK2, the platforms that are supported there, that we do a great job with that to help support the rest of the industry actually build real products. So this tension that we've got as a community of developers working together, yes, there's lots of hard problems here, but let's not lose sight of how this stuff actually gets used, outside of our community.
Yeah, I agree with the core functionality verification aspect. I also think there's the community of users aspect that's pretty important, like the ability for people to work together in the Tiano Core umbrella, putting more drivers there, seeing more third-party things, as opposed to, if I want this driver, I'm going to go to this vendor 1,000 times over. So, I mean, I think there is a purpose there in sharing across the ecosystem that we want to keep beyond the validation of the core content. But that's just my 2 cents. I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to put reference platforms up there so everybody can leverage them.
Yes, I agreed that there are platform features that are not part of industry standards for which there's value in having the one implementation that everybody can use or choose to use if they want to use that one common one.
I think there's also different aspects of this discussion that may have come out already. Some of the things that we're discussing, I think, are need to happen. I think are like more straightforward and obvious, and other ones are more convoluted and probably need more discussion around them. For example, one of the obvious ones I think is we need CI and EDK2 platforms. So we need we need agreement between maintainers to opt in to CI. We probably need to align tool chains in EDK2 platforms. That one may be a bit more controversial, but for example, do we really want one platform to be on VS 2015, another one on 17, and another one on 2022? So things like that causes complexity not only in the people that are building the platforms, they have to go get all those versions of the compiler, but it also causes complexity in CI. Because the VM images only come with certain versions of tool chains installed. And so if we're going to use the latest VM images that have, all the security patches and everything up to date, we can't be building platforms that are not compliant with the latest tool chains. And so I think there are certain like things that we need to do that are just kind of more like obvious and straightforward. And then there's other ones like the multi-repo discussion that probably need more input and everything and how we want to organize things. But I'm just hoping we don't lose sight of the fact that I think there's some low-hanging fruit that we could work on that would be useful in any case of what we decide on the other topics.
Yeah, I like that approach because correct me if I'm wrong, Mike Kinney, but the reason why we stalled splitting up the EDK2 repo and moving things out was that we couldn't get community consensus. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it came like, well, if we move stuff, it hurts everybody and nobody benefits. And so it was like, okay, well, if we can't get past that community hurdle, then there's not a lot of ROI for effort here. Whereas the things you're talking about, yes, if we can just get master in CI for some platforms, that will be a big benefit to the usability of the EDK2 platform's content.
Right. Yeah, it's really about that quality and knowing when things are broken, right? Without figuring it out 6 months later when somebody finally comes around and tries to use it again, right? It's having that clear visibility to things being broken and keeping the quality up in all of the content under TNO Core.
And so I think, the CI specifying the requirements that a platform needs to meet to do CI, and if that's the latest GCC, the latest Clang, and the latest Visual Studio, that's fine with me. I mean, as long as they're clear, that'll help get things in there and going. I agree that we don't want the CI to try to support every combo that people might creatively do, correct? Or maybe that's easy, I don't know.
No, it's not easy.
And I think in that same light, the idea that there may be platforms that are currently hosted under EDK2 platforms that are out of date and for which there's no maintainership or interest in getting it, upgraded to meet our CI requirements. I think that's an interesting list to work through because I think, Sean, your point that there's a lot of DSC files and not all of them are platform build DSC files, but figuring out what is the right set of platforms that are actively maintained and run through CI and take the rest of the platforms and move them out, right? It's like move them either into archive, other branches, get them out of the main branch of EDK2 platforms so that anybody who pulls EDK2 platforms knows that the set of platforms that are there are actively maintained and have the expectation of being able to run through CI.
Yep, I think that is something we could definitely work on, and I can say I am working on some of that as well, and I hope Isaac and other platform maintainers are starting to look at that. I think a lot of these topics are coming up though because they are hitting challenges in CI, and CI means that we have to do things more consistently. Otherwise, we just get into the weeds of writing millions of scripts of how to build something, right? Everybody's different. So we are hitting some of these conversations, and I think we will have to resolve some of them, but I agree that we should be making some background progress on some of that as well.
So like just to remind everybody, where's the center of CI tool chains in EDK2 repository today? What's the common combinations that we run through all the time?
So on any EDK2 pull request, which is ultimately how things get merged, we compile almost all packages, although not quite all. Some packages have not opted into that service yet. We run all those checks, whether it's spell test, whether it's formatting checks, all those things, just to get basic conformity of the code. You know, we'd argue over how valuable spell checking is, but honestly, we just have agreed for the most part that things should be spelled right, and it helps communicate intent. And then we do compile the emulator package, ARMvert and QEMU for x64 and make sure they all boot to the shell. So that's what we have today.
And it's limited to Visual Studio 2019 and GCC, which version today?
It's GCC 5, but it's really GCC 11, I believe. But the toolchain tag is GCC 5.
Yeah, for me, the big toolchain that's missing at the moment is Xcode 5, because I've run into problems with that.
You know, we briefly talked about Xcode when Andrew was on this call months ago. I think we actually had a start of this call. We talked about who's going to own toolchains. I think I have failed at finally delivering that email to the community that says, hey, here's the toolchains that don't have an owner. But we do have a real problem in trying to find maintainers for the toolchains. And I'd say Xcode 5 is one of those that we've had problems with. I think Clang is another one that we all said, hey, that would be great. We should be using it. It's great. It's cross-platform, all those things. We haven't found an owner yet for it. There's a bunch of variations in the toolchain file today. None of them work for all scenarios. There's one in EDK2 staging that's supposed to be better, but again, we don't have an owner. So there was some discussion in this group that we would send out an email that asked, and I think I did send out the email asking people to take ownership or come forward if they're willing to own a toolchain. And if not, we're going to mark these all as not supported and kind of, again, force the community to figure out what's important for them and then put backing behind what's important for them.
Okay, so for Xcode 5, I have a Mac Pro in my rack that's set up for CI, like my GitLab CI and stuff. And so yeah, I can do development on that and try and keep Xcode 5 working at least.
That sounds great. I'll try to revive that email and then you can reply to it, but that sounds great.
Okay, thanks.
So since we are kind of wrapping up here, I do have a commitment in 7 minutes. I do have a branch in my own GitHub that has CIs running on EDK2 platforms for the EXT package as well as USB 3 debug. Those are just two random packages I picked that were feature packages because this group decided that feature packages were easier to start with. Especially given the lack of platform maintainers that are attending this call. And so there's a Tiano Core GitHub discussion that has a link to that. And you can, if anyone is interested, you can look at that and hopefully replicate those results. And hopefully if you're a package maintainer or interested in a package, could do the work to bring on a package.
And
You'll
does that
see it's
follow
not-
Marvin's tightly coupled as far as it's a head of both repos together? Is that what it's testing?
So the way I've dealt with the dependency today, and there's a lot of flexibility here, is we essentially use it's actually hard coded in the CI file of what commit from EDK2 we should be pulling. So I would say that it's probably most like a cascading solution, although it is not tied to any stable tag. It is just tied to when the CI, the owner of that CI file has decided to update. There is
So it does
lots of
support that-
options.
So in a sense, that supports the bisectability that Marvin raised, right? Because basically that CI file with the tag branch or hash or SHA that of the dependency is there and checked in, right?
Yep. So I think that is one important thing. At the moment, while we still have this dependency like that, I prefer to actually see when you have to rev the commit that you're depending upon, there's a set of, a patch series that goes with it that says, these are the changes I had to make to support this newer version of EDK2. I think that's very helpful for people, especially out of tree people.
Sorry for interjecting, but I don't think it actually resolves any of our concerns because, well, yes, the X4 package, for example, would pin a specific EDK2 commit, which is indeed nice. But X4 package in the big scheme of things is not a top-level package. So it basically is a feature package. So it will be consumed by some board package or product package or whatever kind of top-level package. And if it consumes multiple feature packages and they all have their own EDK2 commit hard-coded in the CI, well, it's again a then what situation. So this is, well, not ideal.
I agree, Marvin. As far as the consumers of the content, it has more issues. We're just talking about how do we get so that we understand and can catch quality issues, with the content under Tiano Core. And so I think that at least has a tight binding between a feature package and which version of the EDK2 it's been validated against through our CI system is really all it expresses. It does not express all possible compatibility.
So for the ARM platforms, there's going to have to be quite a bit of tidy up and discussion about that, because there are quite a few actually that claim support both AArch64 and ARM. In reality, they only either build or run on AArch64, and the 32-bit ARM support is basically nonsense.
Yeah, if anybody has connections to the maintainers of the ARM platform packages, that would be great because, like I said, we're definitely missing them from this conversation, and not getting them involved in this.
I mean, that's basically Ard and Leif. And so Leif being a steward, I guess that should be, and I mean, I'm currently working with him, so it should be pretty straightforward to get him involved at least.
Sounds great.
As we're running out of time, is there any documentation on how to quickly set up and test the CI stuff? Like I see your branch, the enable CI v1, is that still current? Is there any documentation on if we want to implement this for X4 package, for example, now, on how to quickly get started?
So there's a README in there. I think I called out in the discussion. I pointed at it. Hopefully that works for you, and that actually does already build the X4 package.
I quickly skimmed through the README, and I don't really see how to invoke like the server CI. I saw some commands for running it locally and all of this, but how do I, as far as I understand, it runs on Azure. I've never really interacted with Azure or its CI services.
So one of the things we've tried to do with CI, and most of that has been by this group saying it was important, is we want CI to run locally exactly the same as it does on Azure. So that lets everyone run it locally. I have not turned it on in Azure. We could do that, but I haven't done that yet, given that it's pretty early in this process and we're still trying to get a lot of input.
Okay, so to test this, I have to do it locally and install Windows or whatever.
It generally works cross-platform. There is some other requirements on Linux. They are documented. I'm happy to help you with those if we need to. There is the new container build. If you haven't seen, we are trying to make everything much easier, and Linux is great in that we can use containers. So I think that's probably where we're headed there, to try to make integration and people's ramp up time easier.
Just to point out again that by containers, that does mean Docker. There are several container technologies on both Linux and the BSDs and Unix, etc.
That's fair. If there's other things, it'd be great to hear more feedback and get help porting to other container environments if that made sense.
Sure. And yeah, I'd also like to continue, start a discussion around how I could go about adding support for like FreeBSD and macOS and the other BSDs to the Stewart tools, so we can properly support those.
Yeah, we're out of time today. I got to drop, but the PyTools have those repos. They have issue trackers in there. I know you've been communicating with Joey on that. I would encourage that to continue. We can use this this meeting as well to talk about PyTools. We often do, but I think those are good goals, and we're happy to try to help enable those platforms. Any last things? It seems like this was a good meeting. I appreciate everyone putting more comments out there and more thoughts. I guess, Mike, this seems like we should definitely continue a Europe-friendly time zone, or at least this time work better than Monday afternoons Pacific time.
Right. The only question is frequency. Do we want once a month, or we want every other week? What do you want to do here for the European friendly time zone?
People on the call have feedback? All right, well, we'll start once a month and see where we can take it from there. Again, please use the discussions and an email, and let's see if we can get some of these things resolved, or at least better alignment. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.